All right, welcome to the podcast. I have special guest Takashi Ohno, who's a state representative. He's on the Public Safety Committee, so I'm very stoked to talk about public safety issues with Mr. Takashi Ohno. How's it going?
Hey, I'm happy to be here, thanks.
Right on. I first saw you online when there was the Public Safety Committee meeting where you guys were discussing the emergency releases, and I thought you really stood out because you were well informed on the issues. You were quite pointed and specific in the way that you delivered your questions, and I felt as though you were like the main guy out there who really wanted to see there being like accountability for something so controversial as emergency releases. So in review, what would you say were some of the pros and cons of what transpired with those COVID-19 emergency releases?
I'm thrilled that you watch. A big part of the reason why I just felt so compelled and motivated to speak out and represent my constituents on this issue is because of the people who've talked to me, whether they're folks who have been victims of domestic violence, people who are just scared of the date of a potential inmate coming back into their home. I've been on the phone with people who've had their homes broken into. They wake up in the middle of the night or walk around the corner of their bedroom into the living room and they see a stranger in their home. It's jarring to say the least. It's terrifying. It's something I don't want to happen to anyone ever in their life. Because of those issues, I followed the inmate release program. We were quite clear with the Special Master Foley, who was appointed to oversee and direct this program. We sent a letter as a legislature. We had over 30 people who signed a letter saying, and let me just quote, I'll just read the very first sentence because it's quite clear. Dear Judge Foley, we write to express our strong opposition to the release of inmates at this time. He did not follow our strong opposition to this program. Instead, he let it continue. I think that some of the pros and cons, of course, it helped the judiciary and the Supreme Court in that they did not have to oversee this program specifically. They got to have someone else take the hard choices, perhaps take the fall, but they got to be shielded from this decision. I think that some of the cons, where do we start? People have been harmed as a result of this. It's been based off a premise that was proven false, and I think that we'll be dealing with the consequences of these decisions made by Special Master Foley, made by the public defender for months, perhaps years to come.
Yeah, no, that's too bad that it happened that way. I did kind of call BS a little bit, and I thought it was like a political maneuver for the Supreme Court to anoint a special master. And then what I thought was interesting, and Special Master Foley was open about this, was he refused the option where he was the one making this decision to detain or release. He foisted that responsibility back onto the jury trial judges, which kept him in a position where I kind of felt like he was hired to make those tough decisions and paid to do those tough decisions, but then he took the easy side of the fork of the road and decided to make recommendations, and then the responsibility was like back onto the court. So I was a little disappointed that that's how that transpired. Could you point out a few of like the flaws within the recommendations that were made? Maybe the address issue or the check-in issue. Could you go into depth about that?
Yeah, absolutely. In the first filings, the first report that's been put out by the folks behind this program, there's a specific mention of ankle monitors. There is mention later in the report in full disclosure, it does say that there aren't sufficient ankle monitors, but there wasn't any reason why Special Master Foley could have said, you may be released on the condition that there's an ankle monitor for you. I think that the question of how we're going to get those inmates to trial, how we're going to make sure that some of them check in with their regular contacts is a question that is unanswered. But the part that just boggles my mind is, if you recall, this all transpired in March and April. And during those months, the mayor and the governor both issued stay-at-home orders. The courts and these judges with the authority given by Special Master Foley, let inmates out of prison who did not have an address. Meanwhile, all the rest of us in the state are told to stay at home. And if not, we will be breaking the law. There are only, remember, a dozen reasons why we could be outside of our home for that period of time. It just boggles my mind. It doesn't make sense to me. I think that this is a program, had we not been in a pandemic, it would not have transpired. And I think that's also part of the reason why I felt that it was premature. And Special Master Foley, as you mentioned so succinctly, dodged the bullet, perhaps did not put his opinion and take leadership positions as he should have, instead allowing those around him and skirting his responsibility to make the calls.
Yeah, and I'm like probably over specialized as a bail bondsman. What we do is we get people out of custody, and where we really sort of like deliver on an obligation is we guarantee that people return to court. And one of the huge red flags in my industry is it's super hard to get in touch with somebody if A, they don't have a cell phone, or B, they don't have an address. There's no way for me to like get in touch with them if they don't have those two very basic things. Now, there are like workarounds that we could try to implement. For example, like multiple check-ins, daily check-ins in like really bad cases, weekly live check-ins. There are solutions that you could try your best, but you're already sort of like at the fringes by the time that you're like saying, oh, we're gonna have to track you with a monitor. We're gonna have to like force you to check in daily. Like you're already sort of at the fringes when you're talking about people who they need that amount of supervision just to guarantee that they're gonna obey the stay-at-home order or like return to court. So it's super disappointing, and it's super obvious that if somebody doesn't have an address, that you have to be super careful and implement ways where they can maybe get into a shelter or some sort of workaround. So spinning off of that, people were released. Do we have any updated numbers on the amount of rearrests from the roughly 500 or so people that were released?
To my best of knowledge, it was reported that there were 47 rearrests at the time of the informational briefing of which you mentioned earlier. I don't know if there's any number, there's been a number that's been shared since then, but frankly, one is too many. If because of this unprecedented and premature program, if there's even one more person who has property stolen, who is physically assaulted, who has emotional distress because of someone who has a history of domestic violence is back in their life, if even one person has been harmed that way, I think that's one too many. The entire premise of this program, of this release, was mentioned and was cited.
They were supposed to be nonviolent. That's the right. One other super obvious thing that totally didn't happen. Violent people who were like pre-trial on violent charges like assaults, domestic violence, totally were released. Do you mind if I share a story very quick?
Tell me about your friend.
Okay, so and after the podcast, we'll walk right next door and I'll show you. So there's like this little area, and our building's the exact same, where we all go back home, and in the morning sometimes there's still people that are camping out, they're homeless, whatever they're doing, I don't want to assume, but kind of some heavy people that, sometimes you got to ask them to kind of move just so you can get into your storefront. Our neighbor, who is close friends with my dad, and we've been a client of his for over 20 years, he had been going to work early, and there was, still some guys hanging out, and he asked somebody to leave, and that was the case during my podcast with acting prosecutor Nadamoto, where he mentioned somebody had gotten beat up with a golf club. I didn't put two and two together. I didn't know it was our neighbor until just a few days ago when, it's crazy. And because of that, I looked at the case, and he had done what he had done to our neighbor. He had been in custody. He was released despite it being a felony level assault. And then as you follow the case, he was released due to the emergency release proclamation. The guy missed court, and then was picked up again by HPD. So HPD had to do extra work, public safety was altered again, and our poor neighbor, who is an elderly man about the same age as my dad, now there's a possibility, I don't know what happened, I'm not gonna follow up with him, he's been through enough, but then there's a possibility of, hey, he's out, how do we know he's not gonna hang out here in this building or back at that building? And I had to ban my own dad from coming in early to work because I just don't know. They're around the same age. It could have just as easily been my dad. And we had to change the way that we actually operate here. So violent people were released. Are there any other things that you could add to the cons or the errors besides violent people being released? Or the many things? I don't know.
This whole process was started by the public defender, and he started by writing, "It's inevitable that the virus will spread into jails and prison facilities." Inevitable is quite a strong word, and I believe that premise and his excitement over this issue, recall he's not an
epidemiologist, whatever the damn thing is, yeah. An expert in viruses.
Right, but he did weigh in that it was inevitable that the virus would come in. The entire program was based on a false premise. There are currently still 0 cases that we know of in jails and prisons. I believe that the public defender, it was shocking to see his inability to be responsible for any of the results of this program that he himself started and he himself pushed through. I also found it just disappointing that he was there was so little gratitude on his part for the efforts of the public safety officials who have worked so hard to keep the virus out of our prisons and jails. To those hardworking people who work at OCCC or any of the places around the state, there were changes to their job procedures. They still had to show up at work, even during the height of this pandemic. I wish the public defender had recognized some of the hard work and success that public safety was able to achieve during this time. So the public safety, the state public defender, he, in his rationale and in his testimony to us, he cited some examples, extreme examples of places where COVID-19 had gone rampant in the jail systems. And I can't dispute that, but there are more states and more comparable prisons and jail systems that I think we should compare ourselves to. In Hawaii, we have 0 cases in our prison systems, and I'm getting this Marshall Project. You can look it up online, just Google Marshall Project, COVID-19 prison or something. Hawaii has 0, Idaho has 0, New Hampshire has 4, Alaska has 4. We can compare ourselves to some of these states and see that they were successful in keeping it out of their systems. There's actually, you can rank these states by number of cases per 10,000. There are 25 states out of the 50 that have 1% or less of their inmates who've tested positive for COVID-19. That's half of our country. I think when you start comparing Hawaii to perhaps New Jersey.
Yeah, or New York, yeah.
You're not making an apples to apples comparison. I think that he got a little excited, and I think that he brought along Special Master Foley along into that excitement to make this difficult and, in the end, I think, unfortunate decision to go ahead with this program.
Yeah, and I did want to add something for our viewers and listeners. I want to I'll stick up for the public defender's office because there are a lot of really good people in the public defender's office that I work with on a daily basis or at least at a weekly basis. And the problem is they have sort of like an ethical duty to advocate for their client no matter what. And I feel as though the emergency release humanitarian proclamation or release request was a shot that you have to take if you're advocating for your client. but I feel as though the court needs to have certain guardrails because, of course, prosecutor's side is going to say, no, keep them in custody. The public defender's side, they're ethically bound to advocate. And if they have like cause, or even if it's just like a cloak, they just have cause to advocate for their client, they kind of have to make the argument. They have to ethically make the argument. But the whole thing should have been handled differently. And I took issue with the mentality of people who didn't have addresses, and then they kind of did a Jedi mind trick. They said, oh, wait a minute, we can't criminalize homelessness. We can't have people in custody because of homelessness. So if they don't have an address, we still have to let them go. And I was just thinking to myself, what are you talking about? You're talking about homelessness, which is a real issue, but we're also talking about somebody who was a victim, who called the police, a report was made, a detective or somebody at HPD actually had to do work to see if there was probable cause to arrest somebody. Prosecutor's office had to review things, set bail, the court had to confirm the bail. We're not talking about somebody who just got ripped off the street, put into custody, who's homeless, who has to stay there, who's homeless. We're talking about somebody who's accused of a crime, charged or indicted, and oh, by the way, there's already a review where we see if people are eligible for release on their own recognizance. There's already a review where they're eligible to get out on supervised release if they don't have the money to post bail. So we have a population of people languishing, not because they're homeless, but because before we get to the point if they're mentally, if they have any sort of mental issues, if they have any sort of drug issues, before we get to that point, what supersedes all that is somebody was victimized, called the police, and somebody was arrested for being accused of doing a crime. How do you think we just lost that and then we jumped to, oh, we're criminalizing homelessness, we have to let them out even if they don't have an address?
I'm boggled too. You have to ask Special Master Foley, the public defender. To me, those circumstances that we were in March and April did not warrant the release of people without an address, especially again, because there was a stay-at-home order.
Do you think it was even like worthwhile? Do you see any really compelling like pros to have had a special master in the first place?
Well, if there's anything I can say is that there should be a process for this. As an elected official, I have to speak out against the desired outcome. But one of the system strengths of our democracy is that we have three separate but equal branches of government. The judiciary is separate from the legislature, it's separate from the executive office. So they do have some autonomy to run their ship how they see fit. I'm just calling what I see, I'm calling the shots I see, and I'm seeing that it was a mistake. But if it is a pro, this is a reflection of democracy working, that the judiciary shapes the life of all the folks who live here in Hawaii. And they don't have to necessarily listen to the legislature after 30 of us, told them, please don't do this. I recall Mayor Caldwell also said the same thing too, as well as the police chief, as well as the prosecutor. But this is just a reflection of how strong our democracy is. Unfortunately, it just led to a bad outcome, I feel.
So I try to be positive, even though I was really negative for a while. I apologize. I try to be more positive than I was previously just now. But you're a legislator. Your tool and the thing that you can control and affect is that of legislation. Do you have any legislation coming up or any ideas that will help maintain or strengthen public safety?
Yes, absolutely. One of the ideas that I'll be introducing in the next 2021 session is the idea to make the police chief an elected position. Now recall, the governor is elected, mayors are elected, I'm elected, the city prosecutor is elected. I believe it's time that the police chief is now elected as well. Just take a look at the conversation we're having across America, and this isn't the first time. We have had discussions about policing policies in our past, recurrent. I feel that the way that the police chief is now chosen, which is by a police commission, it's the police commissioners are selected by the mayor, and we vote for the mayor. It's just too many steps between the public and the selection of the police chief. I believe the public is well informed. I believe that the public is capable of voting for a police chief who shares our policies, who shares our priorities. As a result, I think that the police chief should be elected and they should run for office. It's the best way to keep our leaders accountable.
Yeah, definitely. I do like the idea of transparency, and I can't believe we have to have the conversation still about fighting for transparency. And as I read the papers, I see that there is a House bill that got introduced so that, officers that have been suspended and or fired can now finally be named to the public. As of right now, SHOPO back in 1995 was able to carve out an exemption when it comes to the disclosure of that. And the reports that get submitted on the police discipline records, it's just super vague. There's no names, there's no times, there's no dates. There's not really much of a description either. And could you go into depth a little bit about that new House bill that's supposed to let us know the names and more details?
It's a bill that's been introduced a number of times. In fact, it was up for consideration a year ago, but did not end up making it past the finish line. It made it all the way through the last step, but didn't quite get over that last hill. Because of the recent events that have transpired across the country, the protests, the unfortunate incident with George Floyd, I feel that some of us at the legislature has felt it's been a tipping point. When I understood what happened to George Floyd, Mr. Floyd in Minneapolis, I don't have the heart to watch it. It's just something I think I would have a hard time seeing. But in reading about the incident, to me, it's clear that the officer who did this to Mr. Floyd didn't consider the consequences, didn't consider the fact that there would be repercussions for his actions. I think that he thought that he was bigger than the system. And I think that for any public employee, politicians, teachers, public health nurses, agriculture inspectors, and police officers, no one is bigger than the system. That our strength comes within that transparency to voters. Remember that your paycheck as a public employee is funded by people like you and other taxpayers across our state. I feel that those people who want to rise above the law or who feel that there are never repercussions for their actions as a state employee, I feel that it's a dangerous mindset. And if this House bill is one step towards curing that attitude among any public worker, then I'll be in support of it.
That's awesome. That's progress right there, because I had to go super deep into that because I did a video with law professor Ken Lawson, and I had to watch that video so many times and then edit it up just to cut into the podcast. It's definitely something that, there's something to having to watch something like that. They have jobs on Facebook or YouTube where you have to be the moderator to remove stuff, and then these people go through stress after the fact of their job. Yeah, no, you can't watch that stuff over and over and over again. So I was really happy to see that they were trying to pass that law to disclose the names. But I will make one caveat, because again, I spoke to 2 law enforcement officers just today, and super stand-up guys. I don't want to talk about just bad apples per se, but I would like to say that the job is gnarly, people are freaking crazy, and I would push back only, I don't think we need to publish allegations, because I could just say anything about an officer. I don't like that guy. I'm gonna say he touched me inappropriately, or I'm gonna say he whispered something underneath his breath that was racist or something. If it's not substantiated, that's kind of the line that I draw. But then after review and then somebody gets suspended, we gotta know about that. We gotta know that, because the guy who has Officer Chauvin had 17 different either complaints or reprimands, and I'm like, 17? I feel 3 is enough, right? 17? How do you get 17? That's just far too much. Now transitioning and pivoting to other things that have been proposed. There have been proposals for a new jail. Where do you stand on a new prison or a new jail?
We should buy the federal detention center. We should lease that space we already lease the space currently. We should be in control of it. There's room there. And the most controversial part about relocating OCCC is that no one wants it in their backyard. And you can understand that as elected officials, we have the power to appropriate your tax dollars. And that goes into the process of building a new jail and a new prison. And you can imagine that as we are also, in addition to the power to appropriate tax dollars, we are also beholden to our constituents, and we have to run for re-election if we want to continue to shape policy. If it happens to be in your backyard, you can just imagine development in Hawaii is tough. Take a look, they're trying to, on the windward side, they've been talking about building the Waimanalo sports field, right? A telescope on Mauna Kea. When they build large towers anywhere, those are tough. But I think a prison in your backyard is a whole new level of community opposition. The federal detention center is already in place, and I would challenge anyone to name what part of the island is it at. And if you can't tell me where it's at, then you should not oppose using that location in addition to OCCC as places to keep our inmates. If you're curious, it's by the airport.
Yeah, I run by there all the time. With the federal detention center, also, no disrespect to what you guys do in the government, but oh my God, like the cost of new construction in Hawaii and the overruns always get super out of hand. And if we could just get something gifted from the feds so that we don't have to have that controversy of, oh, is it on schedule? Is it over budget? Has it been denied? Like whatever the feds got, it's definitely an upgrade over OCCC, because OCCC, some parts were built in like 1906 or something crazy like that. It's been literally like additions where buildings have been just added on little modules in piecemeal, and it's not like a legit facility. So I'm definitely for the rebuilding of that. And then maybe in the next pandemic, because there's going to be another pandemic, they could properly socially distance and we don't have to have this conversation about emergency releases. Yeah. I have a Stolen Stuff Hawaii question from Angela. With the way that COVID-19 is like affecting the tourism dollars and our tax base, and with all the ambitious things that we want to do, public works, public projects, paying teachers, electric vehicle programs, all that kind of stuff, how are we gonna like get creative to fund these things when our tax base is shrinking as we speak?
Yeah. Well, Angela, thank you for asking your question. That is a very, very hard question because the future is hard to predict. We are anticipating about a 12% decline in tax revenue, at least for the next couple of years. And we kind of take different Council on Economic, they put out a forecast. UHERO at the university puts out a forecast. And we take that forecast, and that's how we kind of budget for the next couple of years. As we have considered a potential economic downturn, this is before the pandemic. I think that there was always talk that while our economy has been booming for the last 4 or 5 years, we always saw that on the horizon there would be a downturn, just like all economic cycles. So thankfully we had put some money away in our rainy day fund. Some folks have called for also a little bit of money being siphoned out of our hurricane relief fund. That was set up around Iniki after that massive need for state infrastructure arose because of a natural disaster. But I think that as we go forward and we've talked about reinventing the Hawaii's economy, it's a great time to take advantage of some of the natural strengths that our state provides. For example, agriculture. For example, clean energy production. Those are things that Hawaii has an unfair advantage compared to other parts of the state. and I feel we should be capitalizing on them. At the state legislature, we have had some discussions in the past week and voting on different budget bills where we'll be using some of that money in the rainy day fund, as well as some of the CARES Act money. That's the money that the federal government sent our way. We have until December 31st to spend it. We're going to be doing things like starting up a Hawaii Works program, which kind of might be modeled after a conservation corps, where we're going to ask different departments and different nonprofits to start hiring people to do work beneficial to the state. One of the exciting things that I've heard is that we're going to give money to local businesses who have operations making PPE or hand sanitizer products. You probably read about distilleries who kind of changed their model. Instead of selling beer or libations, they've started making hand sanitizer. We want to spur local companies who are going to be able to help us catch up to the need of PPE over the next 6 or 12 months. We want to help them, and we're going to do so by providing grants for them to continue that. We're also going to ask the Department of Agriculture to start incentivizing development on our farmlands with some investment of that CARES Act money and rainy day funds. It's going to be a tough next couple years, not just for state government, but for a lot of folks around this state. We hope that we've socked enough money away to kind of lessen the pain, but to Angela, we are hoping and praying for the best, and we're trying to be as prudent as possible while still apportioning some of that money that we've saved to reinvent our economy.
Wow, that's a really good answer. So I'm happy that you are in the style of answering questions where you give solid, actionable steps that are specific. I was criticized on one of my other podcasts because, when people just answer a question, they say a bunch of stuff, but they didn't really answer the question. Mm-hmm. You actually answer the question, and I really appreciate the detail that you go into. So I appreciate that. Are there any other things that you got on the horizon, or anything you want to plug, or how can people find you if they want to find out more about Takashi Ohno, young, smart, up-and-coming legislator? Thank you. Wow, you're so kind.
So I'm a member of the legislature. You can find me, just Google my name. It's Takashi Ohno. Happy to connect with folks. If you happen to live in my district, that's Liliha, Nuuanu, Alewa Heights, kind of by the Pali highway area. If you live in there, that area, I hope to get in contact with you soon. Let me know how I can do a better job. Hopefully we get to talk again soon, but hopefully we don't ever have to do so about an inmate release program.
Okay, that's a wrap.